we now live in a funny old world. We live in a world that is increasingly made out of computers that we inhabit. If you live in a modern house, a house built recently, especially in this part of the world where high-spec insulation is critical to an efficient housing design, the computers that control your house's respiration and temperature are critical to it. When you remove those computers, the house immediately becomes uninhabitable. If you leave it out for any length of time, depending on the time of year, that house can become permanently uninhabitable. They discovered that in Florida, and they turned the power off on those subprimes, and then a year later had to scrape them down to the ground and start over again because of the black mold creeping up the walls. Your car is a computer that hurtles you down the road at 70 miles an hour with you trapped inside of it. We've seen attacks at Chaos Computer Club, or Chaos Computer Congress, and Black Hat and DEF CON on the informatics of cars, where via the Bluetooth interface, both the brakes and the steering could be compromised in cars. You're basically riding around in a badly secured case mod when you get in a car these days. The 747 that I flew here in, I live in the United Kingdom, that I flew here in the other day is a flying Sun Solaris workstation in a very fancy aluminum case connected to some tragically badly secured SCADA controllers. And it's not just that our bodies are inside of these case mods. It's not just that we live inside of computers increasingly. It's that increasingly we have computers inside of our bodies. So if you're like me and you grew up with a Walkman, or maybe you're a little younger and you grew up with MP3 players, whatever it is, you've logged enough of these punishing earbud hours that there's going to come a day, if you live long enough and you're not killed by a self-driving car first, where you're going to end up with a hearing aid. And that hearing aid is almost certainly not going to be beige, retro, hipster, analog, transistorized hearing aid. It'll be a general purpose computer that you wear in your body. And depending on how it's configured, it will know what you hear. It'll be able to stop you from hearing things that are there, or make you hear things that aren't there, or tell other people what you're hearing. And it's not just that increasingly this stuff is becoming true. In large part, it is already true. So I travel a lot. I'm a frequent flyer. I'm changing the climate. Ask me how. And anyone who flies around a lot knows that the first rule of travel is ABC, always be charging. And so the first thing you do when you get to an airplane lounge or any other room is you start looking on the baseboards, looking for plugs. And if you find a plug, you run over and you plug your computer and your other devices in, because that's your lifeline to the rest of the world when you travel. So one day I found myself in an airport lounge where I was very smug about having cornered the only working electrical outlet and was charging my laptop before the flight. And a man came up and very cheekily said, "Do you mind if I use that plug?" And I kind of looked over my glasses at him and said, "I'm charging my laptop before the flight." And he rolled up his pants leg and he showed me the robotic prosthesis he was wearing from the knee down. And he said, "I need to charge my leg before the flight." And I said, "It's all yours." So this has enormous implications, because computers have unique properties that distinguish them from all of the other kinds of technologies that we've had before. Historically, we've had things that were general purpose, and we've had things that were complicated, but not both. Either something was a wheel, in which case it was general purpose, or it was a car, in which case it was relatively special purpose. And we've tended to locate our regulation in the complicated special purpose world. If you said to someone, we figured out that people talking on their cars, on their phones while they drive is a driving hazard. It statistically raises your likelihood of a fatal crash. We're going to mandate that cars not be built with phones in them. No one would say, well, that's a fool's errand, and if you tried, it wouldn't be a car anymore. But if we said, well, there's a high statistical correlation with bank robbery, getaway vehicles, and wheels, so we're going to ask you to start building wheels so that they can't be accommodated to bank robberies, we would know immediately that this was a fool's errand, and that anything you tried to do, it would do incredible violence to the underlying utility of something fairly important in a lot of domains, which is wheels. But computers are both of these things. They are both general purpose and highly complicated, and it disorders our intuition about their regulation, and it does so to enormously bad effect. So before the advent of the general purpose computer, we had computers, but they were special purpose. If you wanted to calculate a ballistic table or tabulate an election result, you would get a bunch of physical, mechanical, electronic components, and you would wire them together to do that thing, or maybe two or three things. Maybe it would calculate a ballistic table, and it would also help you calculate a certain kind of actuarial table. But you wouldn't get it to run all of the programs. If you wanted a computer to run a different program that wasn't conceived of in the construction of that computer, you would either tear that computer apart and make it effectively into a new computer, or you just go and build a new computer. And then during World War II, groups of researchers on either side of the Atlantic, some at the Princeton Institute, notably with the help of John von Neumann, a Hungarian mathematician, and some, at Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom, led by Alan Turing, They collaborated to arrive at a thing that is really genuinely new on this earth, which is the general purpose computer, which is architecture for a machine that can run every program that we can conceive of and express in symbolic logic. The general purpose Turing complete computer that runs on the von Neumann architecture that can run every program we can think of without you having to tear it down and wire it back together again. And this was an amazing thing. It's hard really to understand how profound it is, partly because it's become so diffused in our world, and partly because while in theory all computers could calculate all programs, until computers got really fast and good, using a computer designed for one function to calculate another kind of program was often a very inefficient way of doing things. And so we still had special purpose computers until fairly recently. There was a time not so long ago when there was a hard distinction between, for example, a server and a desktop, or a set-top box and a laptop. And increasingly, these are about the package and not the guts, that we've kind of converged on this one thing. In fact, Turing completeness, for all that it was this miraculous thing when it was arrived at, now in hindsight appears to be something that's hard to get away from, right? There's lots of times when you want to not be Turing complete, right? If you're a programmer working for a social media startup and you want to create a little toy programming language that lets your users have sparkly GIF unicorns, it is pronounced GIF, sparkly GIF unicorns that caper from one edge of the screen to the other while people are looking at their updates. You might want to build a little toy programming language that lets you specify the size of the unicorn and the speed at which it goes and its sparkle rate and so on. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 little primitive instructions. Inevitably, almost without fail, after you make one of those toy languages, a researcher will show up at CCC or DEF CON or Black Hat and say, hey, you know that toy programming language with only like 11 instructions in it? I figured out how to build up from them a full Turing complete programming environment, and I wrote a virus in it, right? All the time. We can't not make Turing complete environments, it seems, these days. Magic the Gathering, the collectible card game, is Turing complete if you have a big enough deck. Now, big enough in this case can be very big. Like if you want to do non-trivial computing with Magic the Gathering, you may need another planet to locate your card collection on. But we can, in fact, compute anything with a Magic the Gathering deck just as surely as we can with a contemporary quad-core Intel processor. Now, this poses significant regulatory problems because everything in our world is now one of these general purpose computers. And so every problem that we have involves a general purpose computer doing something that someone somewhere doesn't like and wants to prevent. So we hear about 3D printers printing guns. A 3D printer is just a case for a computer. And so if you want to regulate whether or not 3D printers can print guns, you're effectively regulating what instructions a computer can execute. Increasingly we hear about self-driving cars, and you can imagine a time in the not too distant future where we might want to stop boy racers from drag racing their self-driving cars. We might want to control which instruction sets can be executed on those cars. Or we may decide that every car needs to come designed with a lawful interception override so that we can eliminate the car chase altogether, and the police can simply send an instruction to that computer that it will interpret as a pull over to the side of the road instruction, regardless of what the driver does. And in that case, you have the opposite problem. It's not that you want to make sure that they have a program running, or that they don't run a program. It's that you want to make sure that they always have a certain program running and that they don't shut down a program. Increasingly, our radios are not hardwired at the factory to only broadcast or receive in one frequency or one set of frequencies. Increasingly, they are general purpose computers wired up to analog to digital converters and digital to analog converters that can change their radiating characteristics depending on what code we load in them. And what this means is that effectively, we can now reprogram a baby monitor to be an air traffic control device, which is quite disastrous. And if you say, well, we must make it impossible to turn your baby monitor into an air traffic control device, what you're really saying is we must control which code runs on this computer that's in your baby's room. So historically, we just solved this with rules about what you could and couldn't make. So in the case of radios, for example, before the advent of the software-defined radio, a radio's radiating capacity and characteristics were determined at the point of manufacture by things like what kind of crystal you soldered onto the board, right? What kind of quartz you soldered onto the board, and what other electronic components were attached to it. And what the FCC would do is that before they certified your radio device for use in the wider field, they would look at this thing and they would go, what can it radiate in? What can't it radiate in? What is the likelihood that it's going to unintentionally radiate or intentionally radiate in a frequency that someone else has assigned to them? And they would work with you to manufacture a thing that basically couldn't be put to mischievous use without some heroic effort. You would have to get out your soldering gun, take the thing apart, and rewire it. And if you were already capable of taking the thing apart and rewiring it, you could just wire up a new one from scratch. So it wasn't a big, it wasn't a new problem that we had radios out there that someone who was very sophisticated in electronics and soldering could turn into a mischievous radio. It was effectively the same problem whether or not you certified this radio for use. But now we have this new reality, the software-defined radio, where the code you load determines the radio's radiating capacity. And we don't really have that model anymore because you no longer need to be a soldering ninja to change your radio's radiating capacity. All you need to be able to do is follow some instructions that you found by typing, how do I turn my baby monitor into an air traffic control device, into Google, and then it gives you a blob and you load it into your radio, and assuming it's a trustworthy blob and not one that just turns your radio into an audio bug that transmits everything you say in your house to some hacker on the other side of the world, you may in fact now be an air traffic controller. So those rules, that process of saying before the thing leaves the factory, its characteristics have to be set, doesn't work well in the realm of computers. And to understand why, we have a ready-made case study of 15 years of trying to solve problems by deciding what computers can and can't do at the factory or by mandating how computers can and can't work. And that's the copyright wars. Now, you may remember that about 15, 17 years ago, we started to get computers in our houses that wouldn't do things that we asked them to, even though they were capable of them. And those were DVD players. So you get a DVD player in your house, and you stick a DVD in, and the DVD player would say, this is a Region 2 DVD. I know how to play it, but I'm not going to, right? Or you'd stick it in your computer, and you'd say, rip this DVD as you would a CD. Same drive, same encoding mechanism, same everything. And your computer would say, no, 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 I'm not going to rip that DVD for you. And the way that they accomplished this trick of getting your computer to disobey you was using cryptography. And cryptography is another Alan Turing legacy. He gave us a part of the general purpose computer and also this modern cryptography as we understand it. And a quick primer in cryptography, because it's important to understand how all this stuff works and what its implications are. In crypto, the most basic example we have, we talk about three people who are locked in a kind of eternal rivalry / love triangle. We talk about Alice and Bob and Carol. And you can actually find like nerd folk songs about the romantic life of Alice and Bob and Carol, these three examples from all the thought experiments in crypto. And in the experiment, in the thought experiment, you have Alice and Bob who like each other and trust each other, and they want to communicate. And then you have the wicked Carol. My apologies to anyone in the room who's actually named Carol. If it helps, we can call this third person Clapper, which may work better. You have the wicked Clapper who wants to hear what Alice and Bob are talking to one another about and who wants to intercept it. And Alice and Bob want to take such steps as are necessary to stop Carol from finding out or Clapper from finding out what they're talking about. And the thing is that in the crypto thought experiments, we always start with a few assumptions that are kind of counterintuitive if you don't understand crypto. The first thing we assume is that Clapper knows that the message exists. Clapper can get a copy of the message as it traverses Alice and Bob, the space between Alice and Bob. And there's a good reason to assume that, which is that they're probably using a public switch network like the internet, where there's lots of people who are potential clappers between Alice and Bob. Or maybe they're using radio, in which case anyone with a receiver who's within range can get it. Or maybe they're even using satellite, right, where the message is actually blanketed over a space the size of a continent, and anyone in that continent is a potential clapper wanting to listen in on Alice and Bob. So we assume that Clapper knows that Alice and Bob are talking and actually can get his hands on a copy of Alice and Bob's message. The other thing we assume is that that Clapper knows what Alice and Bob did to the message to scramble it before they sent it from one to the other. And this is the part that really trips up people a lot of the time when they start thinking about this stuff. Because it seems really foolish to use a known method, a method that your adversary understands, to hide something from that adversary. Why would you tell your adversary how you were planning to trick her, right? This just seems crazy. But it actually makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense especially in a university or any kind of scholarly institution, because it's effectively grounded in the same basis as the scientific method. So before we had science, before we had modern scholarship, we had something that looked a lot like it, which was called alchemy. And alchemy was a lot like science, and every alchemist was trying to solve the same set of problems. Primarily, it was the lead into gold problem. And alchemists understood, like in a kind of game theoretical way, that the first person who turned lead into gold would have a short window to make a lot of gold and make a lot of money before everybody else made lots of gold too, and then the value of gold would crash. So you wanted to be really secretive about all the other alchemists. You wouldn't tell any of the other alchemists what you were doing. And the thing is that the human mind has an endless capacity for self-deception, which is why every alchemist discovered for himself in the hardest way possible that drinking mercury was a bad idea. And so for 500 years, alchemy didn't really progress, right? What we thought of as science just sort of stalled out, because every hypothesis that an alchemist devised, he decided must be true, and tested it by designing experiments that no one else was allowed to know about. And, well, the human capacity for self-deception is endless, right? So then alchemists started publishing. They started telling other people what they thought they knew, how they thought they knew it, what they were doing to kind of wring knowledge out of the universe around them. And we call that moment the Enlightenment, and we call that what grew out of that science. And security is a subset of all of these other kinds of sciences. And as Bruce Schneier, the cryptography expert, says, anyone can design a security system that works so well that he can't think of a way of breaking it. But unless you're the smartest person on Earth, all you've done is designed a security system that works against people who are stupider than you. And so starting with Turing and ever since, crypto has been based on the idea that you use algorithms, you use methods that are widely published, widely critiqued, vigorously attacked by everyone who has an interest in trying to unpick them, and that stand up against attack from all comers and all corners. And that's how we develop algorithms that we understand to be strong. And so how is it then, if Clapper knows that the message has traversed between Alice and Bob, and he has a copy of the message, and he knows how it was scrambled, how is it that Alice and Bob can keep a secret from him? Well, the way that they keep a secret is they have a key. And the key is known only to Alice and Bob. And the maths of crypto tell us that as far as we understand, given this whole adversarial dialectical process of peer review and attack and so on, as far as we know, if you don't have the key, using modern cryptographic algorithms, you can't derive the message. You can't get back at the message before it was scrambled. So you can have this scrambled message, you can know how it was scrambled, and in the absence of that key, you can never descramble it. And when I say never, I mean like if you were able to somehow turn all the hydrogen atoms in the universe into computers and set them to work between now and the heat death of the universe doing nothing but trying to brute force that message, you would run out of universe before you ran out of possible permutations that you could run that message through. So this is a really amazing thing, and this is how Alice and Bob are able to keep their secrecy from Clapper. And in this case, I literally mean from people like James Clapper, the former head of the NSA. There's really only one person who knows about the NSA's capacity and who's talking to the rest of us, and that's Edward Snowden. And the one thing that Snowden told us is that crypto is intact. The NSA can do lots of things, but they can't make strong crypto go away. This is why that we have programs that I'll talk about later, like Bull Run and Edge Hill, through which they try to sabotage the implementations of crypto, because well-implemented crypto is proof against even the prodigious talent and resources of the NSA. So provided that the key doesn't leak, Alice and Bob can keep secrets among themselves from anyone, the Chinese government, the NSA, the mafia, the police, anyone who wants to spy on them. Now that works, right? Crypto totally works, but that's not how DRM implements its crypto. DRM does something different. Conceptually, here's what DRM does. And if I want to, say, send you a movie, I'm Netflix, and I want to send you a movie, and I want to make sure that you watch that movie, but you don't save that movie, because like my bread and butter, my alpha and omega is based on the consensus hallucination that there's a thing called a stream and a thing called a download, and that a download isn't a stream. Really what I mean when I say I'm streaming this movie to you and you're not downloading it is I think that your computer doesn't have a save button on it. Because the only way you can watch the movie on your screen is if you download it. right? The internet is not a cunning array of mirrors through which photons are transmitted to your screen. Without you downloading the movie, you can't watch the movie. So I'm Netflix, I want to scramble the movie, and I want to make sure that we can preserve the illusion that you have not been given a copy of the movie. So what I do is I scramble the movie, and then I give you a player. And that player has hidden in it the key to descramble the movie. And that player doesn't have a save button. And provided that you never figure out where I hid the key in the player that I've given to you, that you get to keep on your own computer in your own house or in your own lab, and that you can subject to as much scrutiny as you want, provided that you never figure that out, well, the crypto means that the secret will be intact. You'll never be able to make your own player with a save button and download and watch that movie, download and save that movie. Now, the problem, you may have caught it there, is that I'm giving you a player that I've hidden the key in, and you get to take that player home. And in fact, like, if you're, it's not Alice and Bob and Clapper anymore. It's just Alice and Bob. Bob wants to keep a secret from Alice, and he's told her what the key is, that he's protecting it. And Alice isn't just one Alice. It's like everybody in the world who's got an interest in figuring out what Bob doesn't want the Alices of the world to know. And if you want to join the pool of Alices, you just need to get a Netflix account. So anyone in the world can become Alice for, you know, $8 a month or whatever Netflix costs this month, right? Anyone in the world can become an Alice. Bored grad students with their own electron tunneling microscopes can become an Alice for the cost of a couple pumpkin spice lattes, right? And as soon as that key is extracted, as soon as that key is known and spread, anyone who has sufficient skill can make a player that does things that Netflix, that Bob, doesn't want Alice to do. And so digital rights management systems are kind of voodoo crypto, right? They're not really crypto because real crypto assumes that the person you don't trust doesn't have the key, right? The whole thing falls apart if the person you don't trust is given the key. You might as well not be scrambling it in the first place, really. So what happens when we actually implement this as our solution, right? When we say, okay, well, there's people doing things we don't like with computers. We've sold them the right to watch the movie once, and they figured out how to watch the movie later. They're watching TV the wrong way. How do we get them to not watch TV the wrong way? Well, we're going to make a law. And so in 1998, the American Congress passed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It has analogs all over the world. In Europe, where I live, we have the EUCD, the European Union Copyright Directive, which became law all over Europe in the early 2000s. In Canada, where I'm from, embarrassingly enough, we got Bill C-11 in 2012. And the reason that's so embarrassing is that making really dumb mistakes about the internet in 1998 or 2001 is just barely forgivable. I mean, back then, we still thought that 500 channels of cable would be an amazing universe of content. But to make that kind of dumb mistake in 2012 is just felony stupid. We passed this law, and the law says it's against the law to tell someone how to break a lock. It's against the law to tell someone about the keys. It's against the law to make your own player. It's basically against the law to do any of these sort of Alice and Bob shenanigans. And it hasn't been very good at stopping people from actually making their own players that do things that the entertainment industry didn't want you to do in the first place. For one thing, the law is effectively saying, if you're going to break the law, you should know that you're also breaking this other law. Right? Well, generally speaking, your attacker has already demonstrated her willingness to break the law. Informing them that breaking the law is also against the law, even more so, is not an enormous deterrent. And you know, the evidence of this is all around us. You don't need to be a super smart crypto hacker to build your own player and extract movies or other kinds of content and render them in the clear and do what you want with them. All you need to do is know the magic incantation movie name space BitTorrent, and you can find the copy that somebody else went ahead and removed the crypto wrapper from, and you can get a copy in the clear. So it has been totally ineffective at stopping piracy. I think everybody agrees with that. Even the entertainment industry, when they argue for it, they say things like, well, it's a speed bump, or keeps honest users honest. Ed Felton from Princeton says that's like keeping tall users tall. But it does have some impact, right? I mean, there's a reason the industry likes it, because they like it and they use it a lot. And the best reason for it is that it's a system of private law. It lets them make up their own rules about what is and isn't against copyright law. For example, there's no law that says if you watch a movie, you can't save it till later. In fact, There's this whole Supreme Court case called the Betamax case that tore up the country from 1976 to 1984 about the question of whether or not when someone shows you a movie that you're only supposed to watch once, and you use some technology to let you watch it again later, whether or not you've broken the law. The Supreme Court, 5-4 in 1982 said, or 1984 rather, said, no, that's not breaking the law. So there's no law that says you're not allowed to save your Netflix movies. There's just a law that says it's against the law to make a technology that lets you accomplish this otherwise lawful purpose. So this plays out in ways that are really easy to see. And again, a thought experiment to play out to understand this is to think about the difference between CDs and DVDs. So imagine it's like 1996 and you walked into like a Tower Records, right? It's like Back to the Future. You walked into a Tower Records. DVDs have just come out and you've got $2,000, $1,000 in this pocket and $1,000 in that pocket, and you spend this $1,000 on CDs, and then you go upstairs and you spend this $1,000 on DVDs, and you take them home and you stick them in your vault. And then if you don't have a vault, you could use a box. And then 18 years later, you come back and you take them all out of the vault, and you see what you can do with them. Well, normally when you put technology in a vault for 18 years, it depreciates rather precipitously. I spent all my .com money on laptops. I can tell you for a fact that there is no lasting value in buying technology with your money. It depreciates very, very quickly. You think driving a new car off the lot and its value dropping in half is bad. Try getting a laptop out of the box. But normally that technology will have depreciated very precipitously, but CDs, very different. So when you bought those CDs 18 years ago, all you could do with them was listen to them. But now, because there's no digital rights management layer, there's no locks on this, you can use products that are legal, like iTunes, and you can rip them. And once you've ripped them, you can stream them, you can back them up, you can make them the background of your school presentation, you can mash them up, you can use them as ringtones and alarm tones, you can put them on a centralized server in your house, you can do all of these things, right? They all came, this was latent value hidden in your CD that you have gotten to realize over 18 years thanks to the fact that technology and business have come together to expand the universe of functionality. Now, take the DVDs. 18 years ago, what you were allowed to do with your DVDs was watch them. Today, the only legal feature for your DVDs is watching them. It's the only feature that they have, same feature as 18 years ago. It's actually hard to imagine a technology that has stood still for that long. I mean, there aren't a lot of other technologies in our world where 18 years ago the function set was what it is today. You know, and from car cigarette lighters to mobile phones, I mean, it's hard to imagine a digital technology that stayed still for that long. And you know, if you want to think about what that means practically, if you bought some CDs and you want to listen to them on your mobile device, you rip them and you listen to them on your mobile device. If you bought some DVDs and you want to watch them on your mobile device, you buy them again, right? So this is why the industry loves it. It doesn't stop you from pirating stuff, but it stops other companies from making products that would otherwise be legal, that let you do things that are otherwise legal, and allowing you to realize that latent value. I call it the urinary tract infection business model. With CDs, all the value latent in the CD kind of flows in this healthy, easy gush, right? But with DVDs, it comes in painful dribbles. Every time you want a new feature, you've got to open your wallet. Now, there are other impacts that this decision to make digital locks, give them legal protection, has had on our wider society, our society built out of computers. One of the major ones has been on people who are not considered when we talk about the user story for technology, people who are out of the room when we think about what a product should and shouldn't do. One of the major groups for that are people who have sensory or physical disabilities, who have historically relied on their ability to lawfully modify and share their modifications in the technologies that make up their world in order to add assistive features to them. And so, you know, organizations like National Institutes for the Blind, National Institutes for Deaf People, and so on, and organizations that help people who have physical disabilities, mobility disabilities, have historically made available to their members technologies that add on to the things that you can buy in the stores that improve their usability. And the entertainment industry doesn't want to frustrate the interests of blind people or people who have hearing disabilities or mobility disabilities. They're not mustache-twirling villains who have set out to put digital locks on that make it a felony to add those features. But they did put locks on that made it a felony to add those features, not because of any animus towards people with disabilities, but because of a total depraved indifference to people who have disabilities. And again, if you live long enough, you will be one of those people. And so it's a thing that they've done to all of us. My friend Liz Henry at Mozilla says that we are all temporarily able-bodied. The other group of people who are not in the room when we design technologies historically are people from the global south, people from poor and developing nations, who, again, it's not that the industry has any animus to them, but they don't represent much of a customer base for these technologies, and they have use cases that are very different to the use cases of people in the developed world, whether it's intermittent access to networks and power, or different legal regimes in terms of the legitimacy of the state and the capacity of the state to harvest personal information from their devices and use it against them and their friends. All of those characteristics are very different in other countries, and historically people in the developing world have used the ingenuity that is all of our heritage to modify the devices from the developed world to work under their circumstances. But because it's a felony to do this, productizing that, getting investment capital for it, making it available in your country or region is not available. And this not only impacts people in the developing world, but also those of us in the Fed West. So there's a version of the free and open source operating system Linux, GNU Linux, some people call it, called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu was developed for use in sub-Saharan African schoolrooms in places where, yeah, there's not a lot of power, there's not a lot of network access, and where there's not a lot of systems administrators, and also where the hardware changes from time to time. You might expect components in the computers to fail, and so between boots you might have a different video card or a different processor or different ports available to the computer, and so the operating system has to be able to dynamically sort itself out if it wakes up in an environment that wasn't the one it went to sleep in. And so because GNU Linux is an open platform, they were able to modify something that came out of the developed world and make it into something that could be used in the developing world. Now, here's the cool part. It turns out that a lot of the operating characteristics of people who work out of sub-Saharan African schoolrooms have a lot in common with people who spend a lot of time on the road, like me. Intermittent access to power, intermittent access to networks, broken hardware all the time, no tech support, no one's ever available to talk on the phone when my computer is broken because it's 2 in the morning and I'm in a hotel room. It turns out that's my use case. And it's the operating system that I use every day. Technology transfer does not just flow north to south. There's no monopoly on ingenuity and good ideas in the north, but when the north pushes out all of its technology in a wrapper that is a felony to unwrap to the south, we lose that north-south trade. But the real problem isn't what this does to consumer expectations. The real problem isn't what this does to people with disabilities or people in the global south. The real problem here is what this does to all of us because of the impact that it has on security. So the rules about digital locks, the rules protecting digital locks, as I said, make it a felony to help you remove a digital lock or to give you information that would help you remove a digital lock. Well, what information will help you remove a digital lock? Fundamentally, it's information about any flaw in that lock's implementation. Any error the programmers made when designing that lock is the crack into which you can drive your Python in order to erect a whole infrastructure that will let you, for example, trick your iPhone into installing apps that don't come from Apple's App Store but come from a rival app store, or trick your DVD player into playing out-of-region DVDs, or trick your console into playing games that you homebrewed instead of games that came from the Nintendo store where Nintendo gets to keep a 30% commission. Those flaws, those gaps, those things that allow us to jailbreak devices are not merely useful for jailbreaking. They're also useful for any other kind of compromise we want to make to those devices, any other kind of way that we'd like to reconfigure those devices. So reconfiguring your phone so that it listens in on you also relies on exploiting one of those flaws. And since reporting on the existence of one of those flaws is a felony, we all inhabit this fool's paradise where people who discover vulnerabilities in our devices are not allowed to tell us about them. And as a result, those vulnerabilities are longer lived than they would be in other circumstances. A good example of this was in 2005 when Sony BMG, the record label, shipped out 6 million audio CDs, 51 titles. They shipped them out with hidden software that executed automatically if you put the CD in your computer's optical drive. And what it did was it changed your operating system so that the operating system could no longer see programs or files that began with $SYS$. If that string was there, your operating system would swear blind that the file wasn't in the directory, that the program wasn't running. And then they installed another program that checked, that was resident, that sort of hung around in the background on your computer and checked to see whether you were ripping a CD. And if you were ripping a CD, it silently killed that ripping process. They just wanted to stop people from ripping CDs. This was kind of the next level in the copyright wars for them. And independent security researchers discovered this pretty quickly, but they didn't publish because they were worried that in publishing information that would undermine a copyright protection mechanism, they would commit a felony. And it wasn't an idle concern. A programmer named Jan Johansson was actually, named Dmitry Skilyera was actually imprisoned in America. He was a Russian national. He was imprisoned in America after giving an academic presentation, a technical presentation on flaws in Adobe's ebook platform. And so they had genuine cause to fear that they would run afoul of the law if they told people about this. Now, as soon as it became understood that if you had a program that started with $SYS$, that the operating system would be blind to it, virus writers all started prepending their viruses with $SYS$. Of course they did, right? Because the virus detection software could no longer see it. When you make a hole in something's immune system, you should expect opportunistic parasites, right? It's only natural. And so even though this stuff was known, it was not patched as quickly as it could be. And by the time it was patched, the security researcher Dan Kaminsky did some very clever research and calculated that between 200,000 and 300,000 US government and military networks have been infected with it. So there's this enormous impact on our security when you make it a felony to tell people about the flaws in the devices that they rely upon. The problem here is that we know how to make a computer that can run all the programs, but we don't know how to make a computer that can run all the programs except for the one that pisses you off, right? We don't have a model for Turing complete -1. We can't make a computer that can run all the programs except for the one that rips CDs or prints out guns or that allows people to drag race in their cars or confounds the lawful interception program that pulls their self-driving car over the side of the road. And our closest approximation for this is what Sony did. It's a computer with spyware on it out of the box. It's a computer with a process that is designed to hide from you, and that it's a felony to tell you about the details of it, that lurks in the background on your computer and waits for you to do something that is considered undesirable by someone who's managed to put this process on your computer. And when you ask your computer to do this, instead of saying, "Yes, master," or if it's particularly silly, "Are you sure?" your computer turns to you and says, "I can't let you do that, Dave." And we know how that movie ends. So this is the fate of any effort to solve a social problem by breaking a computer. You have to put a mote in their eye. And this should be causing alarm for you, because the devices that entertain you, that have some kind of colorable claim to making it illegal to open up their locks or to tell people about flaws that might help you open up their locks, those devices have converged with the devices that you use every day, all day, and that are all around you. Your mobile phone is not a thing that you make phone calls on and then throw birds at pigs with. Your mobile phone is a supercomputer in your pocket that knows who all your friends are and everywhere you go and what you talk to your friends about and where you are when you're talking to them. It has a camera and a microphone and a location sensor. You keep it with you while you're on the toilet. You take it with you into your bedroom. It sees your kids running around naked. It knows how to get into your bank account. It knows what your lawyer and you are talking about. It knows about your VPN passwords for work. It knows all of these things. And because it also lets you watch Netflix movies, it's against the law to tell you if there's a flaw in that device that might expose all of those things to remote hacking. And this is not just true of your phone, it's true of your laptop and of the cloud services you use. We've had recent breaches that were very grotesque. They were the young Hollywood stars who had their compromising photos splashed all over the web. But even before that, there was a woman named Cassidy Wolf who was the Miss Teen USA in 2013. And Ms. Wolf had her computer compromised by a drive-by malware attack. Someone had found a vulnerability in her browser, and in a common browser that many of us use, and had
compromised a web page so that it waited for people to land on that page who had that browser, and then infected their computers. And the thing that her computer was infected with was called a RAT, a remote access Trojan. And this is a thing that allows you to covertly operate the camera and the microphone, to read the keystrokes, to gather the pictures from the screen, and so on. And the man who compromised her, he captured incidental photos of her naked in front of her computer, because we all are occasionally naked in front of our computer. And he also captured her social media logins, and then he sent her an email and said, I control your Facebook. I have compromising photos of you. Those compromising photos will end up on Facebook unless you perform live sex acts for me. And so she called the FBI. She was the first of his more than 140 victims to call the FBI, because when he was caught, he had more than 140 victims, including many minor children all around the world. And he's just one of many, they call themselves ratters, around the world who have done this. Some of them are actually legitimate ratters. A company called Designerware of Northeast Pennsylvania, which services the rent-to-own laptop market, settled with the FTC a year and a half ago, along with 7 of its customers, for pre-shipping rats on the laptops that they gave out as stolen property recovery tools to help them repo laptops when people miss the payments. And they stipulated in their settlement that they had been recreationally watching their customers through their cameras and making recordings of their customers having sex, recordings of their children in the nude. They'd made audio recordings of confidential conversations, sensitive conversations. They had plundered their hard drives, looking for interesting files to pass around, and so on. And the FTC, as you would hope, they said, you must not do this anymore unless you put it in the user agreement, in which case you can go on doing it. So this is only going to get worse, because the copyright wars are just the opening skirmish in this all-out war on general-purpose computing, because the conditions that led lawmakers to decide the way to solve the people watching TV the wrong way problem is through making it illegal to change how your computer is configured. Those conditions still prevail. Lawmakers have not become notably more clued in. And in fact, the problems of computers have become more urgent since. The problems that computers are in the center of have become much more urgent since. When the head of the FBI says that he wants backdoors in iPhones that are now encrypted by default, what he really means is that he wants to put a program on your iPhone that you can't remove, or have your iPhone configured so that you can't add a program to it that he can't read in. It's all much of a muchness. He wants to be sure that it's a felony for you to modify your computer. And you may have seen in the New York Times that there's 1 million subprime cars on the road, cars whose loan notes were issued to people who are poor credit risks. And the way that they control that risk is by fitting the car's ignition switch with a remote disable function that uses the GSM data network to send signals that allow them to remotely turn off your ignition if you miss a payment, and uses a GPS to locate your car wherever it is. And there are 1 million people driving these cars, and of course YouTube is full of videos of people explaining how to remove these things, because it's not hard to remove them. It's just Alice versus Bob again, and anyone who wants to can be an Alice, including someone who's at least as smart as the person who designed the ignition switch control device. And so it's hard to imagine that if Congress was willing to say it's a felony to show someone how to watch a movie in the unintended method, that it shouldn't be a felony to allow someone to steal a car or confound an FBI snoop warrant. So the problem is that when we add these backdoors to our devices, when we add these vulnerabilities to our devices that are designed to stop us from doing bad things and make us only do good things, and that are supposed to only be modifiable or controllable or unlockable by the good guys, is that these backdoors have no allegiance. There's no way to design a backdoor that only good guys can come through. So all of our network switches since the mid-90s have been designed with a backdoor. There was a law passed in the Clinton era called CALEA, which is a lawful interception bill that says that if you design a switch for telecom, you have to design it so that law enforcement can wiretap any conversation without having to come down to the central office of the phone company and add a big wiretapping device to their network. They have to just log in and run a program, and then any phone conversation they want is theirs for the taking. And there's a lot of problems with this. Well, for one thing, all the switches that are made to comply with this, even if they're not intended for the US market, because you wouldn't want to foreclose on the possibility that someone in the US would buy your product. And so the CALEA capacity is built into every switch, and then the people who buy it turn it on or off. Now, in Greece, they don't have a lawful interception law, and so they didn't turn on the CALEA stuff on all of their switches. But having a switch that's designed to be silently wiretapped turns out to be less secure than having a switch that's not designed to be silently wiretapped. And so during their 2005-06 Olympic bid, someone, we don't know who, but they were very good, but they forgot to erase their logs, broke into the central office of the main national telco in Greece and wiretapped the entire parliament and the president. Right? Having a switch that's designed to let remote parties secretly listen in on you is less good than having a switch that's not. And we see this over and over again, whether it's devices and technologies designed to do surveillance or backdooring that are sold into the US law enforcement market that we discover in Gaddafi's torture chamber, or the turnkey surveillance state in Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian government has actually bought off the shelf everything they need to run a totalitarian state. All of the technologies that they've bought are made for legitimate law enforcement, but when you have a state that's a kind of authoritarian basket case, legitimate law enforcement and illegitimate law enforcement are impossible to tell apart. I'll leave it as an exercise to you to decide whether or not this country has a legitimate law enforcement apparatus. You may have heard that China hacked Gmail several years ago and pulled out the mail and communications of a bunch of Chinese dissidents who were using Gmail. They used Google's lawful interception backdoor to do that. A system that is designed to be secure against all comers is less secure, is more secure than a system that's designed to be secure against all comers except for someone who knows the secret knock to get in. So this is only going to get worse. In 2012, the late security researcher Barnaby Jack traveled to Australia to give a demonstration of his work on implanted defibrillators, and he showed that from 30 feet away, he could cause implanted defibrillators to administer heart attacks to their owners. Here, I believe at the University of Michigan, you've had researchers do some very blood-curdling demos where they've wired up a pacemaker to a piece of raw bacon and then compromised it through its Bluetooth interface and had it cook the bacon. Now that Google Nest is being rolled out to more and more homes, we have increasingly houses that have smart thermostats that are designed to be overridden by remote parties. They're smart meters where the power company is supposed to be able to reach in and turn down your heat or your air conditioning when the power system hits peak load. Those devices are great if you trust your power utility, but it's less good if you're in Ukraine and you're marching in the Euromaidan, and one of the Stinger devices that are used by law enforcement around the world now to gather the unique serial numbers of all the mobile phones that go past them is combined with a system like Google Nest to turn off all the heat of everyone who shows up for a demonstration in the middle of the winter and keep it turned off until the civil unrest ends. And there's, this is compounded or made worse, exacerbated by market conditions that have created a business model for building the technologies of surveillance and control. The folks from Reprieve who do work on US drone strikes in the Middle East have been consistently amazed by how little the CIA, who do the operations on these drone strikes, mostly it's not the US Army, and mostly it's the CIA for complicated diplomatic reasons, how little they know about the people that the drones kill. They're targeting them based on metadata. The head of the CIA gave this quote, "We kill people based on metadata." It doesn't get clearer than that. They know very little about this, and the reason they know very little about this is that the CIA, which used to be a very human intelligence heavy organization that used snitches, that used people, spies who went in and knew a whole lot about who was doing what, they have largely become a signals intelligence organization like the NSA. They've been driven to a kind of big data solution to their problems where they have giant servers that they use to crunch all this data and figure out kind of algorithmically who may or may not be guilty. And maybe they've done that because they've bought into the big data hype, but another reason to think about this is that there's a business model for selling servers to the CIA. There are lobbyists from military contractors who are at the CIA's door and at their oversight committee's door every day with products to sell that do big data analysis. There's no product to sell that does human intelligence, right? There's no product that makes it possible for you to go and hang out with Pashtuns and figure out who should be drone struck and who shouldn't. All you can do is train people and send them in. And so there's this weird cascading perverse incentive that's arising out of the general climate of corruption in government procurement processes that are driving us away from useful solutions and human intelligence and into this big data world. Now, science fiction writers have grappled with the question of whether technology will liberate us or enslave us since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. But I'm not very interested in that question because it seems pretty clear to me that technology can do either. And because even if the answer was that technology was likely to enslave us, I think our ideal answer would be exactly what our answer was if we figured out that technology could set us free, which is to maximize those things about technology that give us freedom and to minimize those things that enslave us. It doesn't matter which of those things your answer is. Technology is not a problem to be solved. It's a fact on the ground. The useful question isn't should we be optimistic or pessimistic about the future of technology, because the future isn't foreordained, right? It's determined by what we actually do. So the question I'm interested in is what can we do to make a difference? Now, there are organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the American Civil Liberties Union who've been on the right side of this fight for a long time. But there are also decisions that people can make in academic settings, like rejecting the use of digital rights management in our archives, rejecting the use of surveillance technologies as part of our network management structures. I'm a recovering CIO as well as a recovering Torontonian, and I know those are hard decisions to make, but they're the right decisions to make. We can refuse to accept the security syllogism that goes, something must be done, there I've done something, now something has been done, because some of the problems that we face are real problems, right? I'm worried about things like self-driving racing cars, and I'm worried about things like 3D printed guns. But the one thing that copyright wars have taught us is that a prohibition on running certain instructions won't stop bad guys from running those instructions. It'll just make it hard for everyone who's not a bad guy to secure their devices. So I'm not going to ask you to eschew all of the things that are making the world worse, right? It's impossible to be a full-on vegan, let alone a breatharian in your technology choices, right? Yeah, you can eschew Facebook, which is effectively a giant Skinner box designed to teach us to minimize our privacy. Or you can say, well, I'm not going to buy a fruit-flavored phone because their alpha and omega is DRM, or I'm going to stop watching movies on Netflix because they've inveigled the World Wide Web Consortium into adding digital rights management to the web standards themselves and turned every browser into a long-lived reservoirs of vulnerabilities that can arise to screw you in every single way from asshole to appetite for the rest of time. You know, at the end of the day, we have to live in the real world, and our phones connect us to the people we love, and sometimes they have the apps that we need to use, and Netflix has got lots of great movies on it, and sometimes it's hard to watch them in any other way, and Facebook might be where all your friends are. And so I'm not going to ask you to give up all those things, but I am going to ask you to maybe do a little budget. Calculate how much money you're spending every month with companies whose mission is to destroy the future that we all want to inherit and that we want our children to inherit. Ask yourself how much you're spending on your cable bill for a company who's made it its mission in life to destroy net neutrality, and make sure that one of two national companies decides whose information you're allowed to see on the internet. Add up all the money that you're spending, decide on a fair percentage that's the right number for you to give to groups like EFF or the Free Software Foundation or the ACLU or Public Knowledge or Creative Commons or any one of the other hundreds of organizations that are working to stem the tide of technology that is intended to control us instead of serve us. I am neither pessimistic nor optimistic about these things. What I am is hopeful. Hope is why, if your ship sinks in the middle of the open sea, you tread water. Not because you're likely to be picked up, but because everyone who has ever picked up treaded water until rescue came. And you know, if your ship sank in the middle of the open sea, and you were with people who were less able than you, someone who couldn't kick as long as you could, you know that you would wrap that person's arms around your neck, and you would kick twice as hard for them, because that's what we do. Now, the planet Earth and its information infrastructure, it's where everything that we love and care about is. You know, as the tick said once, don't destroy the Earth, that's where I keep all my stuff. And the fight over the future of technology is not the most important fight we have. We have fights that are way more important than that. We have fights about our global climate. We have fights about racial justice and economic justice, about justice for across genders and gender identity, and weapons proliferation, and a million other things. And every one of those fights is going to be won or lost on the internet. And so without a free and fair and open information infrastructure, we have no hope. And so what I ask you to have is hope. I ask you to find a way that you can keep kicking and kick for the people who are less capable than you. Find a way that you can increase the way in which technology is making us more free and decrease the ways in which it's taking away our freedom. We have the capacity. People in this room have more capacity to do this than most of the people in this world. We are in the global 1% of people who have access to the ability to make good technology decisions and to have those decisions redound for other people around us. So that's the end of my talk. It's a call for hope and to keep kicking. Thank you.